If it's Wednesday, tensions, turmoil, and Trump. The former president launches his third bid for the White House as the Republican Party struggles to set a new course after last week's disappointing election results. Plus, control of the House still uncalled, but Republicans are just one seat away officially from retaking control of the House in January. Then the real test begins for the party, actually governing. And fears of NATO involvement and a massive escalation in the war in Ukraine are easing today after officials say a deadly blast inside Poland was most likely an accident caused by a Ukrainian defense missile. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Chuck Todd. So despite all the GOP hand-wringing over last week's disappointing election results and all the calls from Republicans about needing a new direction, perhaps new leaders, here we are with the new leadership of the Republican Party, looking a lot like the old leadership. Today, Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell survived a leadership challenge from Florida Senator Rick Scott. 10 Republicans broke with McConnell, not nearly enough to defeat him. Essentially, he knew who the 10 would be before this vote even happened. It comes after House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy also survived a leadership challenge, easily winning a majority in a closed-door vote yesterday, but signaling he has work to do when the need for 218 votes becomes a thing when the official vote for Speaker takes place on January 3rd. So the current Republican leaders in the House and the Senate appear to be staying for now. And then last night, Donald Trump made it official that he isn't going anywhere either, declaring another run at the White House officially. In his speech, Trump pledged to restore America to where it was when he was in office. He, of course, also took aim at some of his longtime enemies, dabbled in conspiracy theories about voting. His remarks were heavy on personal grievance, including literally playing the victim card.
We must conduct a top-to-bottom overhaul to clean out the festering rot and corruption of Washington, D.C. And I'm a victim, I will tell you. I'm a victim.
It leaves Republicans with yet another moment of reckoning about backing a twice-impeached former president who incited an insurrection. And he also faces possible criminal indictments on multiple investigations. Not just that, Trump also cost the party in the midterms. Also cost them a Senate majority in 2021. Here's Mitch McConnell, not so subtly, pinning the party's problems on one person.
Here's the problem. We underperformed among voters who did not like President Biden's performance, among independents and among moderate Republicans who looked at us and concluded too much chaos, too much negativity, and we turned off a lot of these centrist voters, which is why I never predicted a red wave to begin with.
Now, McConnell didn't stop there. He also walked through a few Senate races last week where Republican candidates struggled to appeal to more moderate and independent voters, thanks in part to their strong ties to Donald Trump, including Mehmet Oz in Pennsylvania, Adam Laxalt in Nevada, and, of course, Herschel Walker in Georgia. Here's more from McConnell.
Dr. Oz was trying to run as a moderate, trying to appeal to those voters in Bucks and Chester County surrounding Philadelphia. That message got muddled at the end, which made it very difficult for him to achieve success. We had the same problem in Nevada, which was our best pickup opportunity. It reflected itself in Georgia as well, but fortunately, I didn't used to like the runoff in Georgia. All of a sudden, I like it a lot better than I used to. We got a second chance in Georgia to get it right, but that was the problem. The base turned out. We had significant Republican base turnout. We have a problem with people in the middle who still, even though there's not as many of them as there used to be, determine the outcome.
Now, the irony here is that it was Mitch McConnell who could have prevented this predicament his party now finds itself in, or at least could have accelerated the divisive nature of where the party is today. Had he ripped the Band-Aid off 2 years ago, during Trump's second impeachment, and backed the efforts to convict him, which would have barred him for life from seeking federal office, the party could have gone through the painful, divisive process in 2021 and 2022 and might already be in a very different place today. Instead, McConnell opted to stick with Trump, to hold the party together, in hopes of, hey, if we can just keep the party together, maybe it'll work out in 2022. Maybe he can become Senate Majority Leader again. Senate didn't flip, and his party is arguably just as divided as ever, and now we're 2 more years closer to 2024. Ali Vitale is on a very busy Capitol Hill beat for us today. Vaughn Hilliard's in Florida, where President Trump announced his candidacy last night. And also with us is Michael Cruz. He's a senior staff writer for Politico, who's frankly chronicled the entire Trump era of the Republican Party in many terms. Ali, let's start with going inside this Senate conference. Boy, yesterday, I love Mitt Romney's description that it was a 4-hour a celebration of Festivus, the Seinfeld holiday, where everybody aired their grievances. Where's this Senate Republican conference today?
Having just aired grievances. I mean, like, that is really the feeling up here. There's a lot of awkwardness when you consider the fact that it depends if you look at this as a glass half full moment for McConnell or a glass half empty, because on the one hand, 37 votes, he says he's comfortable with that. It's clearly well over the number that he needed to keep his job here atop the Senate Republican conference. At the same time, though, 10 votes against him also means that that's 20% of the conference that actually voted against him. So certainly there's two ways of looking at this here, but for everybody now, they have to focus on what it is to be in the minority. How can they still notch wins here in a Senate that they managed to lose? I do think that when you look at both the House and the Senate here, the fact that both McConnell and McCarthy faced a reckoning and still came out on top, it makes sense that they would have to go through that period of bloodletting within their party, given the fact that flipping the House was supposed to be the easy part, and they barely did that. So, of course, people are going to have knives out for McCarthy. But then also the fact that they came from McConnell after 2 straight cycles now where he was the top Republican leader and he managed to not notch any wins. That's, I think, very notable for this party.
You know, Ali, the irony here is that it should be the mainstream Republicans and moderate Republicans who are angriest. They should be the ones looking for recrimination, not Andy Biggs and Rick Scott, who were arguably the architects of this base first, some of them were architects and some of them were simply loyal soldiers in this base first campaign.
Yeah, Gates, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, those were the people that initially started being very loud about the job that Kevin McCarthy did, but he had to do a lot to kowtow to them, even just to get to the position that he's in right now. I also think, though, those moderates will have their day, because just as there are a lot of members of the House Freedom Caucus who are going to try to pull leverage over McCarthy, there's also a lot of Republican members in moderate seats that went for Biden, that are very swingy, and at this point in the House, everyone gets to be a kingmaker. You've got like 20 Joe Manchin equivalents now on the other side of the building, so they can have their day here too. It's not just the House Freedom Caucus that's going to have leverage, it's the moderates as well.
You know, the other interesting aspect of today, Ali, is I didn't hear a lot of members of Congress running to the microphone to proclaim their support for Donald Trump's candidacy. There was a lot of wait and see, even from people who seem to have no qualms about supporting him.
Yeah, I noticed that too. I mean, the fact that Kevin McCarthy didn't directly answer the question when reporters here said to him, do you endorse Donald Trump's run? He just kind of said, you're crazy. Now, part of that was that people have been following him all across the Capitol. He made note of that. But it also would have been really easy for Kevin McCarthy, one of Trump's staunchest defenders, who completely reversed his position after January 6th, went to Mar-a-Lago, took that now infamous handshake photo. He could have just as easily said, yeah, I endorse the guy, and he didn't. And then, of course, on the McConnell front of this, not surprising that he's not saying the word Trump, but also not surprising that he's clearly laying the blame at Trump's feet when you use words like chaos to describe the Republican Party.
Rick Scott, it's sort of a double whammy. You know, he loses last week. He's taking some of this blame. He's having to share it with others, and he put his neck out here. What does he hope to gain next?
It's interesting you ask that because, I often look at all of the members of the trifecta from Florida, DeSantis, Rubio, and Scott, as people who have their eyes on the next prize, which is 2024. For Scott, a lot of the thinking was that in running the NRSC and being in charge of flipping the Senate, he could earn a lot of goodwill and eventually leverage that into a potential presidential run. And as I was talking to my sources yesterday, too, about why he would ultimately be the person to go up against McConnell in a real David and Goliath story here, because it was always sort of a given that McConnell would win, people thought, okay, well, maybe there's a way into this for his presidential aspirations as well. I'm not sure I saw that, but certainly he's in for a reckoning here because there's a lot of conversation about what he did at the NRSC, how money was used, how resources were put out there. He's in for that right now, too.
All right, let me move over to Vaughn Hilliard. This is the oddest first day of a presidential campaign for a supposed major candidate I've ever seen. Number one, you're not traveling to Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, Nevada today. You're not on the road there. I didn't see a rollout of endorsements and all of the, pageantry. And he announced at a private country club in the 21st century. That in itself, I know we're also numb to Trump at his clubs, but is there anything less man of the people and populist than announcing at a gated country club?
One that is adorned with gold-painted chandeliers, mirrors. I don't know, Chuck. That's a really good question. And look, yesterday I think was notable because there was not a single Republican U.S. senator in attendance. There was not a single Republican governor in attendance. There are only 2 Republican House members, one of those being Madison Cawthorn, who is on his way out here. Donald Trump had initially had in mind that after the midterm elections here, he would have a stable of candidates who he had boosted to general election wins from Arizona to Wisconsin to Michigan to Pennsylvania, and yet that wasn't the reality that played out. He held and made this announcement here anyways, but it's one in which we have been asking over the last 6 years, when would Republicans really go toe-to-toe with Donald Trump and take back their support? Because if you are a voter, you see your local House member, you see your senators. Let's just take Iowa as an example. You haven't seen Chuck Grassley or Joni Ernst ever step away from Donald Trump. And so all of a sudden, if you do start to have a fracturing of at least elected officials in these communities begin to distance themselves and suggest to their voters that, hey, perhaps now is the time to look elsewhere if we want to be politically successful in the future. Perhaps this is their opening, this is their moment, because you don't see the likes of Kevin McCarthy, even Cynthia Lummis out of Wyoming, Bill Cassidy, who you talked to on Sunday. There suddenly appears to be perhaps an open door here.
Vaughn, a couple of interesting developments. Number one, the family doesn't seem to want to be involved in the campaign as much this time. And number two, how's he handling the muted response to his announcement?
Right. I mean, 2 of the more notable individuals there were Mike Lindell and Roger Stone at his event last night. 2 of his own children, Ivanka and Don Jr., were not. Last night was a speech that we had seen him attempt to give over the years, one that was more of a, as one advisor told me ahead of time, it'd be buttoned up, which was more along the lines of meaning he'd be reading from a teleprompter. But it's twofold here. Number one, it's a backdrop of looking at 2024 as how he was looking at 2022, believing the issues were on his side, from inflation to the record number of migrants coming across the border to low approval ratings for Joe Biden. And that is where, in a way, he tried to paint a darker image of where the United States was at right now. Just to give you the quote that he said was, quote, "I have no doubt by 2024 it'll be much worse, and they'll see much more clearly what happened and what is happening," essentially suggesting that the American people don't understand how bad that they have it or how bad they're going to have it, laying down a justification for why he is making and mounting this Republican run for president for a third time.
Well, he's just remember, he's the salesman. Look at how dirty your carpet is. It's always like the create this, incredibly horrible picture so an incremental fix makes him look good, perhaps. I think that's his old sales technique there. Vaughn Hilliard in West Palm Beach for us, ducking some airplanes there. Vaughn, thank you. Let me move over to Michael Cruz. Michael, you spent a lot of time studying Donald Trump, chronicling him. It feels like there's 2 other moments in his adult life where he's been where failure has punched him in the face. The bankruptcies in the early 90s and essentially the end of The Apprentice. And the gasps he had to salvage his reputation after. What can you glean from that might foreshadow where this campaign is headed?
So what struck me last night was what lots of people commented on, his relative lack of energy. Low energy was a criticism we heard from a lot of people, which is funny, obviously, because that is the exact phrase that Trump himself used as a shiv to eliminate Jeb Bush in 2015 and 2016. But I think it doesn't quite get at the larger point, which is people get tired of Trump. The Trump show gets old. And if he seems tired, it's because we seem tired and are tired of him. And the best, to your point about The Apprentice, perhaps the best example of this is The Apprentice. It rescued him. In the late 90s, he wasn't dead. He had recovered to some extent from those early 90s bankruptcies and the mid-90s sort of doldrums. But it only lasted for a season or so. The first season of The Apprentice was a huge hit, no question. The second season, much less so. The third and fourth, even less, and so on and so forth, until, of course, we got to The Celebrity Apprentice. And this is not quite the right analogy because one is sort of inherently unserious, and this is still quite serious. But I do find myself wondering where we are in sort of the Apprentice and Celebrity Apprentice calendar. Are we, who is Mike Lindell? Is he Meatloaf? I don't know what a Celebrity Apprentice contestant he might be, or which contestants were there last night at Mar-a-Lago. But it feels like we're there, where he's going to have to rely on a habit of his, and it's a skill of his to survive situations that he seems to be in a tight spot. This is certainly one of them. We'll see if he can pull it off.
But you've also spent a lot of time traveling the country chronicling this sort of Republican Party realignment or sort of forced marriage to Trump, whatever we want to call it. Are Republicans going to be making a mistake if they let Trump have the field to himself for 6 months? I know some of them think he'll punch himself out. I'm a little skeptical.
Here's the thing. Donald Trump always has been at his most effective when he has a fight and when he has an easily identifiable sort of number one enemy. That's what he's looking for here. He is looking for a fight, hence the start of the campaign. There are other reasons for it, but psychologically, I think that's what's at play. And he is trying to identify Ron DeSantis as his primary enemy. That's where he's at his most effective. I don't know if it's going to work this time, but traditionally, that's where he has been able to sort of battle his way at situations in which he was perceived to be quite weak and sort of fading. That is death for Donald Trump when he's fading in the spotlight. He needs to create conflict. He needs to create content. And the question is whether or not he can do that here. That's separate from the political consideration of sort of the political capital he is hemorrhaging at this point. That is TBD, but he needs a fight, and he needs to create content, and he's out very, very early. If nobody else is running against him, that's going to be potentially problematic for him if he's appearing to fight with himself more than it.
That could be interesting. Michael, when I was just talking about those late 90s bankruptcies, it suddenly dawned on me, is Elon Musk 1989 Donald Trump? And Trump Taj Mahal is Twitter? Anyway, just something to file away to be thinking about. There's something about Musk that looks like 80s Trump to me.
Yeah, late 80s Trump, perhaps. The comeuppance of the early 90s, we'll see how that
appetite.
happens.
Yeah.
Yeah,
the appetite where he thinks he can buy or do anything. Anyway, Michael Cruz, always great to get your perspective. Good to see you, Michael. Coming up, the Senate moves closer to codifying same-sex marriage into federal law. A key vote that just wrapped up gave us a clue. Things are close. Details next. Plus, Pentagon officials are releasing some new information on that deadly and likely unintentional blast in Poland that killed 2 people. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Let's turn now to some other Capitol Hill news, where moments ago, legislation that eventually will be used to codify same-sex marriage just cleared a key procedural hurdle in the Senate, and it now has the support of 12 Republicans. The measure needed the support of 10 to advance. The bipartisan group of senators behind this legislation actually pushed this vote to specifically happen after the midterms. It's now clear that it was a strategy that paid off. Joining me now is our panel, NPR political reporter Asma Khalid, Democratic pollster and NBC News political analyst Cornell Belcher, and Republican strategist Doug Heye. Doug, let me start with you. Once folks know this is going to pass and be codified into law, do you expect 62 votes or do you expect 75 votes? More Republicans show up on board.
Look, I may have a different perspective on this. I was just thinking as I saw the vote. Look, I worked for Richard Burr, as you know. Tom Tillis is a friend, both senators from my own state of North Carolina. And the first race I'd ever really paid attention to was the 1984 Helms-Hunt race. And if you're telling me or anybody in North Carolina in 1984 that 2 Republican senators from North Carolina and that 62 senators at all would vote to codify same-sex marriage, I wouldn't believe it. So this is a big win, and whether it's 62 or 75, I've never seen an issue move as fast as this.
You know, Asma, I was thinking about, I remember when Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed, also in a lame duck, also after a midterm. It was in 2010, December of 2010. That number grew, and you suddenly saw where I think a lot of people thought, how's this vote going to look in 10 years?
Mm-hmm. I mean, one of the things I've been struck by is as this bill has moved through Congress, you've seen support from a whole bunch of groups. You saw the Mormon Church, the Church of Latter-day Saints, come out and endorse this piece of legislation. So, I mean, strategically, it looks like it was a smart move for the group of senators, for Democrats essentially to wait and have additional bipartisan support in this lame duck session. I also think, largely, I mean, look, the culture has moved on this issue. You go out, you speak with voters ahead of the midterms. This is not an issue that is controversial amongst a large subset of the population. And I think senators are voting in a true degree the way that their constituents feel at this point.
You know, Cornell, I'm also struck by hearkening back to that lame duck. That was the beginning of Barack Obama's reelect here. Can Joe Biden use this lame duck to begin his reelect?
Well, we know we got one Republican in the race already, which the DNC has already taken a shot at. Look, I think in the end, look, Chuck, you know this. What are we going to focus on? And for the next couple of months, you better be sure that Democrats are going to focus on Donald Trump, who is incredibly unpopular. And the vast majority of voters don't want to see him run again, but he's jumping in. So I think for the next couple of months, I think you're going to see most Democrats focused on making this all about Donald Trump and his extremism. I think in the end, the Biden administration is going to have a lot of legislation, Chuck, that they can run on, a lot of bipartisan legislation that they can run on, a lot more than I think any of us on this panel would think they had an opportunity to about a year or so ago.
Right. Doug Heye, so let's play out Cornell's prediction here that the next 2 months Democrats are going to just enjoy using Trump as their foil. Frankly, President Biden didn't waste any time. The White House Twitter feed immediately wants to create the contrast. I think everybody knows why they want to create the contrast. Biden would love to make sure Trump's his opponent in 2024. How should Republicans respond to that?
Well, first, I would say be careful what you wish for. Democrats wanted Donald Trump to be the nominee the first time, and it didn't work out too well. Republicans, they've got a very different calculus on this. And, clearly there are a lot of Republicans who want to run for president. I think a lot of them are going to take their time, maybe not all of them, but take their time and try and see, what the atmosphere really is for Trump. There's a lot of talk of, the speech wasn't great and he was surrounded by the cast of the Adams family again, and the mypillowization of the GOP has been a disaster, and all of these things. But it's very similar to what we heard last time. And so Republicans, I think, are very mindful, especially those looking to run for president this next time. Donald Trump has a lot of power. He also has a huge email list, which he didn't have before, and a lot of money in the bank politically. Mm-hmm.
Asma, I just finished my podcast with Doug and another Republican strategist, getting their take on should you let Trump have the field himself for the next 6 months, or do you get in? And they both thought Mike Pence and Mike Pompeo would be getting in pretty quickly, and that would sort of open the floodgates. But Donald Trump in this candidacy, Donald Trump in this candidacy, I don't think we all, we joke about the never-ending presidential campaigns, but this is now going to be the longest campaign we've ever experienced.
I mean, look, I think I'm really curious to see what other Republicans get into this race. And I will say I'm with Doug a bit here in the sense that I don't think that folks should discount the former president. I think it really comes down to how many other Republicans enter this race. I was speaking with Whit Ayers yesterday, pollster, Republican pollster, and he spoke about the percentage of people within the GOP electorate who are, quote, maybe Trumpers, right? These are people who might be persuaded. And I think he gave a stat around 40% of the GOP electorate feeling that way. I mean, these are people who might be persuaded to vote for Ron DeSantis if this is really just a two-way contest. But if it's a 10-person contest, there's a sizable chunk of the Republican electorate that is still wholeheartedly behind Donald Trump. And, it's advantageous if it's a crowded field.
Well, let me jump in here, Chuck, as someone who's gone through a presidential primary. And by the way, it's not something you ever want to do because it kind of sucks. But look, I think he does have a huge advantage over the Republican field. I really do. I mean, look at the money he's already amassed. And to Doug's point, that his lists are massive. So I think he is a problem for Republicans in a primary. I think he's incredibly difficult to beat in a primary. But also, let's be clear about something. In a general election, yes, Democrats would love to have Donald Trump because he seems to have a ceiling of around 47, 48%. Donald Trump is never going to get to majority. Now, can he have 2016 all over again? Well, lightning can strike twice in the same place, but it's not probable.
Doug Heye, I want to put up something on screen here. This is from National Review. And I'm going to make you tell me what year they wrote this. I think you know where I'm going here. Donald Trump is a menace to American conservatism who would take the work of generations and trample it underfoot in behalf of a populism as heedless and crude as the Donald himself. Obviously, it says it on there. It's 2016. National Review is out again with the big no cover. Big Republican donors are swearing they're not going to support Donald Trump. 2016, big Republican donors funded the Steele dossier at one point. I mean, we've been down this road before.
Yeah, look, I'm not going to sing, but there's a Frank Sinatra tune called I've Heard That Song Before. And we need to see if this is going to be different, if this initial talk holds, or if, Donald Trump gets the nomination, all of the chips and all the cards fall into his lap as they did last time. And we just don't know.
Asma, is there somebody in the party that wants to be the thorn in Trump's side besides Liz Cheney?
I don't know. I mean, I think that's a good question. I mean, I've been very curious when you say thorn in his hot side. I mean, in some ways, I think that could be Ron DeSantis. He could be a thorn in terms of just trying to compete. I think the question I have, and Doug, maybe you know the answer to this, is just the degree to which the Republican donor class decides to step up and say they don't want this to be a multi-candidate field. They want this to be a two-person contest. If it's a two-person contest, I do think it is going to be very competitive for Donald Trump to beat someone like Ron DeSantis. And I say that in part because you go out, you talk to voters ahead of the midterm cycle. It doesn't matter what state they were living in, North Carolina, Georgia, they knew about Ron DeSantis in the Republican electorate, and they wanted him to run. They would mention his name. I didn't bring up his name. I do think, I don't know the answer to that, Doug, and I just am curious what you think. If there are people within the Republican Party able to essentially squash down any other competition and keep it at a two-person race, I think it will be challenging for Donald Trump to emerge.
So I think I'd agree in a two-person race. It's just then hard to do it because you don't. It's not the how many, it's the who. And as we saw in the last time in 2016, you had some Republicans saying, yes, we should have a smaller field. So why don't you get out? I'll stay in. The donor class can influence it, but it really can't make those decisions. And Donald Trump can raise small dollars on an almost unlimited basis.
But Cornell, the idea that candidates won't run, I always give my two favorite examples are Bernie Sanders and Mike Huckabee, because they basically became more powerful, more famous, or more wealthy by losing races for president. There's a lot of money to be made, a lot of policy to be made, a lot of email lists to build by losing a campaign for president.
No, absolutely right. And one guy who I work for by the name of Howard Dean parlayed that into becoming the chair of the party and becoming very influential in progressive politics. So look, it is hard to keep, because we're talking about, it looks not even partisan, but we're talking about ambitious people, right? If you're running for president, you know, all the list of people who think about running for president.
You're already a narcissist.
So if they think they got a shot, I think they're all going to jump in. Good luck trying to clear that field of strong narcissists, alpha types who absolutely want to run.
Especially if every billionaire decides they want their own personal candidate. Asma, Cornell, and Doug, a terrific remote panel. You guys did it really well. Appreciate it. Thank you. For more discussion on the future of both parties, I already hinted at it, post-midterm elections. Actually, this one's just a postmortem on the GOP. So be sure to get today's episode of the Chuck Toddcast, where I said Doug Heye and Sarah Chamberlain of the Republican Main Street Partnership were my guests. It's already available wherever you get your podcasts. We go deep into the Republican leadership fights. Up next, missile strikes, power outages, and some NATO tensions. The latest on the fallout over what appears to be yesterday's accidental blast in Poland as Ukraine's cities face another wave of Russian missile attacks. You're watching Meet the Press now.
We have seen nothing that contradicts President Duda's preliminary assessment that this explosion was most likely the result of a Ukrainian air defense missile that unfortunately landed in Poland. And whatever the final conclusions may be, the world knows that Russia bears ultimate responsibility for this incident.
Welcome back. That was the Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin earlier this afternoon addressing the blast that occurred inside Poland's borders, a NATO ally, and it killed 2 people. Polish President Duda says there was no indication the explosion near the Polish-Ukrainian border was an intentional attack, but rather an air defense missile that unfortunately fell in Polish territory. NATO and U.S. officials have concurred with that assessment. President Zelensky, however, has been adamant that the missile wasn't Ukrainian. The deadly blast in Poland comes amid concerns that the war in Ukraine could continue to escalate and spill over into neighboring countries. This has always been the fear. So many NATO countries on Ukraine's border. As the investigation into the missile blast continues, the CIA director, Bill Burns, happened to be in the region, and he met with Poland's president today in Warsaw, following separate meetings he was already having with his Russian counterpart and with President Zelensky earlier this week. So some fast American diplomacy there at work. I'm joined now by our NBC News foreign correspondent, Molly Hunter, who is on the ground in Lviv, and former U.S. ambassador to Poland, Daniel Fried's going to join me in a minute. Molly, look, we know about what's going on with what happened in the border, but I don't want to get distracted. Russia is bombarding Ukrainian cities again. What can you tell us?
Yeah, exactly. I think that is definitely what we're hearing from Kyiv, definitely what we're hearing from the Ukrainian officials, and we can get to kind of the awkwardness around President Zelensky's kind of doubling down in a second. But let's not miss the big picture that yesterday 2 days ago now, saw the biggest, excuse me, my brain is all fuzzy, Chuck. I've been up for a long time. It was yesterday, was the biggest bombardment of Russian missiles that this country has seen since the beginning of the war. The Ukrainian officials say 90 missiles were fired across this country. They said they shot down about 70, but they are targeting critical infrastructure in every major city and every small city of this country. I'm in Lviv. I'm in the west. I'm about 40 miles from the Polish border, Chuck. 80% of this city was out of electricity. In the capital of Kyiv, 50%. And around cities like Dnipro or Kharkiv, much harder hit, of course, in the east. This is directly targeting civilians. When you knock out transmitters, when you knock out energy stations, power stations, hydroelectric dam facilities, that directly puts Ukrainian civilians in the dark. I can tell you the weather is cold, it is rainy, and as people go into the winter without heat, without water, without electricity, that is really, really tough on civilians. I do just want to touch on the President Zelensky kind of climb down that we might be seeing. Chuck, you did hint at this. Last night, he was very forceful. Russian missiles attacked Poland. Today, he was very clear. About 3 hours ago, he said, these were not our missiles. This was not our missile strike. And then we actually did just get one more statement about half an hour ago where he seemed to possibly be climbing down slightly. He says the Ukrainian position is very transparent. We strive to establish all the details, every fact. That is why we need our specialists to join the work of the international investigation and for us to get access to all the data available. He talks about Russian aggression taking 2 Polish lives, Chuck. But he does not say anything about how this was not our missile or this was not our strike in this evening statement.
Molly, for us in Kyiv, rainy, cold, late. Appreciate you staying up and giving us that report. Much appreciated. Let me move over to Ambassador Fried here. Very interesting that the phraseology we're getting from President Zelensky. I want to talk about the concern. You know, Poland is such an important ally right now to the Ukrainian people and to Ukraine, the country, given how much of a load they're dealing with Ukrainian refugees. Just walk me through the sensitivity. I mean, Bill Burns making his way to Poland. I mean, I assume we took something that could have become a huge issue and basically tamped it down in less than a day.
I think the Biden administration handled this well. That is, they backed Poland from the start. They didn't back away. They didn't suggest that the Poles were overreacting. They backed Poland, and so did NATO. That was critical. Secondly, the U.S. and the Poles agreed to look at the facts. And the facts at this point suggest that it wasn't a Russian missile attack, as it might have been, but it was a mistaken Ukrainian attack. Now, Secretary of Defense Austin is absolutely right. The Russians are responsible because they're the ones who started this war for no good reason. They're the ones who are attacking Ukrainian infrastructure, targeting Ukrainian civilians. So the Russians are at fault. But I tend to trust Polish intelligence and analysis. When they say it seems to be a Ukrainian air defense missile, I think they're likely right. I think that the fact that President Biden spoke to Polish President Duda yesterday, Secretary Blinken spoke with his Polish counterpart, Bill Burns, is in Warsaw. That's exactly the right thing to do. Show solidarity. This time it wasn't the Russians escalating, but next time it might be.
Ambassador, I was just noticing earlier this week that the strain of taking care of these refugees, no country is bearing this strain more than Poland, and I think the U.S. is helping backfill, other NGOs are helping them backfill. But what level of concern are you that at some point the Polish people sort of have refugee fatigue?
I understand the question, but I don't think we're at that point. It's amazing what the Poles did. Poles invited Ukrainians into their homes. There weren't refugee camps. Poles were going to the train station and coming home with Ukrainian families. And when I asked Poles why they were doing this, they said, because this used to be us. It is solidarity with the Ukrainians is bone deep in Poland. They know what the Ukrainians are going through. The memories of World War II are strong in Poland, and they are reaching out in a solidarity that is astonishing. Polish-Ukrainian relations have never been so good in history. So, sure, there are going to be issues, maybe some Ukraine fatigue, but they are way, way, way north of that line. And the fact that the Ukrainians are actually winning the war on the ground with a lot of Polish help, the fact that the Americans are backing Poland, that's going to extend that timeline of Polish social support for the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians are doing okay. And the West's policy is a lot stronger and a lot more successful than Putin counted on and maybe some of the West counted on. I give the Biden administration pretty decent marks for what they've done.
You know, Ambassador, before we got that last statement from President Zelensky, one of my questions was going to be, how important is it that President Zelensky acknowledged that perhaps this could have been an accident? Again, we're only in this situation because of the Russians, but it sounds like he gets it too. Yes?
Look, I understand why the Ukrainians were suspicious that it was a Russian attack on Poland. It's plausible. It might have been. God knows Russian state propaganda is spewing out all kinds of apocalyptic, bloodthirsty scenarios. So the Ukrainians had every right to make this, to be suspicious. But they if it turns out, and it is very likely, that it was a mistake, they should own up to it. Nobody's going to blame them. The Poles won't, NATO won't, the U.S. won't. Nobody will blame them. This is Russia's fault. They started this war. Countries out of war are going to make, unintended mistakes. And we found the hard way, the best thing to do is to own up to it. There's no shame in that. Right. There's no shame.
Well, this was the fear of when Russia started this war, that things can escalate, mistakes can happen, because that's what wars end up causing.
On Putin.
Ambassador,
it's on Putin.
Yep. Ambassador Daniel Fried, really appreciate getting your perspective on this, so thank you.
Thanks
After the break, some big news for the space program, a giant leap for NASA's mission to return to the moon. Finally, you're watching Meet the Press Now.
Three, two, one. Boosters in ignition. And liftoff of Artemis 1. We rise together back to the moon and beyond.
It's fascinating that we had so much action yesterday, tremendous college basketball. You had a presidential announcement. You may have already fallen asleep when that happened, but it happened overnight. Artemis 1, the most powerful rocket ever built by NASA, finally blasted off from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, launching the U.S. one step closer to landing on the moon for the first time in half a century. Now, this is an unmanned flight. They do have test dummies on board. It's a 26-day orbit around the moon before it plans splashdown in the Pacific Ocean next month. NASA hopes to use Artemis to carry an astronaut to the moon, or essentially to orbit the moon, and then they'll have a smaller vehicle to land on the moon. That could happen as early as 2025, believe it or not. The ultimate goal is to build a lunar base, which would then be used for future missions to Mars. Now, NASA scrubbed this launch multiple times earlier this year, first because of technical issues, and then, of course, because of the weather. But so far, so good. By the way, very odd that we didn't hear a reference to Artemis 1 last night down in Mar-a-Lago. Meet the Press, of course, has been covering NASA's moon missions from the very beginning. And as we celebrate 75 years of Meet the Press all this month, I want to show you a clip of then astronaut and future politician turned Senator John Glenn talking about the space race all the way back in 1963 during the very earliest days of space exploration.
Colonel, I'd like to get your own personal opinion on this. You've risked your life and you've devoted your energy and your time in this race to get to the moon. Are you yourself convinced beyond question that it's worth doing, and why?
Well, yes, I am, or I wouldn't be in the position I'm in. I do think it will prove to be worthwhile in the future. Now, as far as trying to pinpoint exact specific benefits that we'll reap from this right now, once again, I think it's an exploration. I think those things are still in the future. We're involved in a lot of research to find out whether it is worthwhile. I certainly think it is.
As part of our, I think it was, Colonel Glenn, I think it was. As part of our celebration of 75 years of Meet the Press, we have some special online interactive features that allow you to dive deep into our archives. Just scan that QR code right now on your screen to get even more historical clips and highlights. It is a lot of fun if you are a history and political junkie. Up next, my one-on-one interview with Georgia's newly re-elected Republican Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger. The future of his party, the increasingly nasty Senate runoff in his state, and why are there still runoffs in Georgia? You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. We still have 10 uncalled House races left on the table, and we expect we'll be able to call House control in any moment when we officially see if Republicans get to 218. But the biggest race still left on the table is not in the House, it's in the Senate. It's Georgia's Senate. Republican candidate Herschel Walker, the incumbent Democrat Senator Raphael Warnock, will face off one more time on December 6th. The matchup is the same, but it's a drastically different campaign environment. Senate control is no longer on the table. Walker is a Trump-backed candidate in a party where some may be looking to move away from the former president, including, perhaps, candidate Walker. Joined now by Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. I haven't seen you since your election, so congratulations on re-election and for a fairly smooth election cycle. Let me ask you this. Why are there still runoff elections in the state of Georgia?
Well, in Georgia, we say that we have to have at least 50+1 to win in a race. And so that's why we do things like that. So that's just how it works.
But it used to work that way in primaries, and then you got rid of it. Is it something that you think, runoffs, the whole idea of a runoff election was created for some nefarious reasons. It was to keep minorities, potentially keep minorities out of power back in the day. This is not the situation here, but is this a case where it's outlived its usefulness?
Well, we still have runoffs in the primaries also. And 4 years ago was in a runoff for the Republican primary, and then in the fall race there's also another runoff. But it's really just to ensure that you have, instead of having someone just a plurality of votes, that they actually have 50+1. And so that's the system. And I support that system. Now, we added going to instant runoff, ranked choice voting for UOCAVA overseas military ballots, which also allowed us to shrink our runoff period from 9 weeks down to 4 weeks. So it really worked out well that way.
Explain to me how that worked, by the way. So you have some instant runoff voting with the overseas ballots?
Yeah, we did that. Yeah, we did that for overseas military ballots because it just really allowed us to then line up our federal runoff period with our state runoff period. So everything now is a 4-week runoff period.
So right now, are those votes already been tabulated, or will those votes be tabulated on December 6th?
Those for the UOCAVA, those will be tabulated and released. There weren't that many, but that'll be something that will be then released. But then also right now we've already built the ballots, and for the absentee ballots, those were receiving applications. Absentee ballots will be going out. And so voters will still have 3 choices. They can vote no excuse absentee. They can vote 1 week of early voting, and then also on election.
You know, as the National Republican Party has this debate about the Trump effect, I always point to you and Governor Kemp as examples that you got more votes by being farther away from Trump's brand than those that were closer to Trump's brand. Is that the simple math you would offer up to Republicans wondering which direction the party should go?
Well, it obviously worked here in Georgia, didn't it? But you have to look at what I've been doing for the last year and a half. I've been traveling all over the states, talking to groups, business groups, Rotary, Kiwanis. I've even gone to Tea Party groups to explain, here's what happened in the election of 2020. Here's what the Election Integrity Act of 2021 does do and does not do. And just take conversations and then take questions from people that were in the crowd and just answer their questions. And I think at the end of the day, I gave people the right answers because it was based on the truth. Now, many of them didn't like it, hearing what the cold, hard facts were, but they could accept it because we had the facts on our side.
Do you take some gratification in the fact that, no, we didn't lose any? It doesn't seem we had any prominent election deniers this year, whether in Georgia or anywhere else. What do you attribute that to?
I think voters are smart, and I believe that most people are good. And I think they want people to follow the law and follow the Constitution. And I think people understand how disruptive it is. We have a process for elections, and we're very good at it. In Georgia, we've shown that we're going to have honest and fair elections for everyone. And as Secretary of State, I don't try and ever put my thumb on that scale to help one side or the other. Yes, I'm a Republican, but I'm going to make sure we have honest and fair elections. And that's really what was rewarded. People doing their job, following the law.
You've been very reticent to weigh in on national politics. Do you have a candidate yet you want to support in 2024?
Well, as Secretary of State, I'm never going to tell you who I'm endorsing just because as the chief election official, I don't want people thinking, oh, he must be doing something to help his friend. And so I will stay out of that. But obviously, I'm a Republican, and I'll be looking for, a strong Republican candidate that has character, integrity, ability to engage in civil discourse. And just quote Reagan, can speak kindly.
Right. Does Herschel Walker have that character for you to vote for him?
Well, like I said, I don't endorse candidates, and I stay out of, commenting on ongoing races.
Well, look, I think that's a fair issue, and I'm not going to press it there because you are the umpire here, and I get that. Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, appreciate you taking a couple minutes and catching up with us. Again, congrats on your reelection.
Thank you, Chuck. Take care.
You got it. And thank you all for being with us this hour. We'll be back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. NBC News Now coverage continues with Heye Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.